Okay guys, this is Tech Sergeant Vance coming at you with the part 2 in the series of videos on hand reloading. This video is going to be on ammunition and what all goes into it. If you haven't watched my first video on safety itself, go back and look at it, and it's going to give you guys a basic information on just general safety to consider whenever you're hand reloading. By all means, I'm not the final expert and end-all source in this, and please consult any manuals you guys have or any documentation from manufacturers. So this video, I'm just going to cover what really goes into ammo and just the different parts to expect whenever you guys are getting into hand reloading. What I got here is a 50 caliber cartridge. I've got a 9mm cartridge, a 45 caliber cartridge, a 308, and a stand-in for a 30-06. This is 8mm Mauser, but 30-06, and we'll get into all that stuff here in a little bit. The first thing I want to go over is I want to go over the different parts of a round in general. So just real quick here, we have 4 basic parts of a cartridge itself. We have the bullet portion, we have the case, we have the powder that would go inside of the case, and we have the primer. So in a nutshell, that's what we're going to be dealing with when we're reloading. As we all know, whenever you fire a firearm, the bullet leaves the barrel. That bullet is propelled by the burning powder inside of it, and that whole process is started by the primer. I'm going to get rid of the 50 caliber here, and we'll move on to the 9mm. So looking at the 9mm, we have the same basic parts, just smaller than the 50 cal. We have the bullet, the casing, the powders inside, and then we have the primer. So to illustrate what we're dealing with here, I'm going to actually pull this bullet out with a bullet puller, and then I'm going to lay it out. I'll do the same thing with the 45 caliber, the same thing with the 308, and then I'll do the same thing with the 30-06 or the 8mm stand-in. So let me get to that. So the first thing we have to deal with whenever we have our cartridge is we start off with the casing. There's the casing there. We also have a primer. This fired primer is going to stand in for it. The next thing we have is the powder, and I'm going to go ahead and pour the powder out. And we have the projectile, or the bullet itself. Let's go ahead and pull the 45 caliber and lay those items out as well. There's our casing. Use our stand-in primer. I'm going to pour the powder out now. There's our projectile, or our bullet. Next, let's go to the 308. There's our stand-in primer. Get this powder out. And here's our projectile. And finally, let's go with the 30-06. So the very first thing I have here is the casing, our stand-in primer, the projectile, and finally the powder. So like on Jurassic Park, I have spared no expense for you guys, and I've made this nice divider to illustrate the point to you on what the things we are dealing with when we're actually reloading. So first up, we have the primer. Like we talked about, the primer is what initiates everything in the actual firing sequence. Primers are disposable. We can get them fairly cheap. It comes and goes depending on the quantity and what type you're purchasing. The next thing that's going to hold all of our components is our case. You can see here the 9mm, the 45, the 308, and the 30-06. The only thing that differs really between these is the size and what primer is actually used. The next thing in category we have is powders. As you can see here, the powders differ in their physical size and appearance, as well as how much is actually in each one. The last thing we have in the ways of our cartridge is the actual projectile, or the bullet. Here's the 9mm. This is the 45, the 308, and the 30-06. When we talk about bullets, we'll talk about calibers and things of that nature. So this was just to illustrate to you guys that no matter what cartridge we're dealing with, we still have the same basic 4 components that we're going to be dealing with. With that, that's going to conclude video 2 on the video series on hand reloading. I hope you guys found this a little bit instructional. It answered any questions you might have for the beginning into hand loading. Next thing we'll go into is the physical aspects of each one of these portions.